Hi, my name is Noel. I'm a mixed media artist and art educator at Pratt Institute. Um, I teach sculpture, and recently I was invited to teach online, and I was pretty excited by this. If you're like me, you're probably stuck at home, but no worries. I thought about a series of projects that would be fun and could be done from home with materials you may already have around the house or in your apartment. If you have ever put two pieces of material on top of each other and glued them, chances are you've done this. See that? Or something like this. Okay, the technique is called assembly or assemblage. Assemblage, which comes from the word to assemble or to gather. It goes way back to this guy and his early Cubist constructions. If you're not familiar with his work, there's plenty of his work online. Wiki defines assembly as an artistic form or medium usually created on a defined substrate. And substrate is another word for material that consists of three-dimensional elements projecting out of or from the substrate, from the material. So actually, this is a fancy way of saying if you're going to assemble something or a work of art and you don't have depth in that work of art, chances are you're making a collage and not an assembly. Many artists use assembly techniques to create artwork. If you were to go to the Guggenheim, the Met, or even the Whitney Museum, a lot of modern artists use assembly as a way to create their work.
In my instance, I was inspired by the work of two of my favorite artists, Elizabeth Murray and Frank Stella, to develop this assembly work.
The first thing you're going to need are materials. For this project, I started with base cardboard, which is where my assembly will take place. Next, you'll need working material. And what we mean by working material is what is it that you're going to create your assemblage with, okay? In this particular case, I actually did a little homework around the house and I looked around and I said, where am I going to get this material? I can't go outside. So, my wife was cooking some spaghetti and I said, oh, can I take that box? And she said, sure. So, here's working material. This is actually a spaghetti box. And what you'll notice is that this spaghetti box, the cardboard here is much thinner. Therefore, it's much easier to cut. And that's something we want for the next part of this project. So that as we start cutting our shapes, okay, we can start thinking about how our assemblage will be composed. Here's a quick example of an easy cut, and that's just a squiggle brush stroke like Stella might do, okay? And that's a quick gesture, if you will. So that's something to think about. I also, here I got this nice box, and the material here is probably a little thicker than this material. See how flimsy this material is? This is almost, it's pretty flimsy, which means that when you paste it on, this is probably more flexible than this, and this is more flexible, this particular material here, right, is more flexible than this cardboard material, which is a material that's typically used for packing, okay? So there are all kinds of grades of cardboard you're gonna find when you're looking around your house, your home, your apartment, okay? This one actually happens to have printing in the back. So it was used to package whatever this was. I guess it was an iron or steamer or something, okay? So that's kind of what you want to keep in mind. And you want to, here's another nice, I found this very cool piece of corrugated board. And what's kind of unique about this, you notice how it just pops already from the surface? What's unique about this is that most cardboard has two sides. You see that side that's flat? Okay, that's sandwiching that little squiggly material in the middle. These lines here, this texture, if you will. And in this particular case, that has been removed. And actually, I was playing around with that in another little project that I did, and I had removed from regular cardboard the texture, the top surface, and I wound up with this, which I actually painted, but that's what it kind of looked like when I started ripping it out. That gave me some really nice texture. So again, you want to be aware of your material and what it can do, because I'm going to show you how we're going to work with it to build our assembly. The next thing you'll need is a nice pair of scissors, okay, kind of like that, and a pencil or a marker of some sort, okay? Maybe a ruler. A ruler's good if you want to cut nice straight lines. And in one of the videos, I show you a really nice technique when you have a piece of cardboard like this here, which is a little tough to handle. I have a technique by where when you score it a few times, this actually comes apart. And I'll be showing that shortly. I do a more extensive demonstration of that, but that's something you may want to figure out, okay, or watch also. Finally, you'll also need, as you start to assemble your pieces together, you are going to need this little magical ingredient, glue. And I, unfortunately, did not have Elmer's glue in the house, and I couldn't buy it, so I had to make it. And this is actually pretty easy to do. Now, what you have to remember about glue is that it takes time to dry. And this particular glue does take a little bit longer than Elmer's to dry, but it's just as strong. One of the most important things about assemblage is depth. It's this idea of assembling, of putting something down and putting something over it, and seeing that this falls on a different plane from this. You see all of these pieces here? Every gesture, every brushstroke-like gesture that's Stella-like, if you will, okay, was cut out initially, and I'll show you how to do that. That's not too difficult. And I have a variety of papers here. I have thin papers like this. I have thick corrugated board like this. I have textured surfaces like this, okay? I have these beautiful, interesting, colorful paper that I use these gestures with. And most interesting, on top of all the texture, okay, when you turn this on its side, I have, you see that depth? They're things stacked on top of each other. You see that? Okay? And that's what you want. You see that stacking, all of that assembly, if you will, and that's all done with the glue that I just showed you. If you look over here, if we do a little bit of a close-up here, this is pretty cool. Now, this technique here, this stacking of cardboard to create depth, is very important in assembly because it gives you the depth that you're looking for. See, I could even actually, here, let me point this out. This is actually from here to here is probably an inch distance in terms of depth. So to get this kind of effect in assembly, artists typically layer it up, okay? So that's the first thing you want to remember. But how do we get there? I make these cardboard wedges. See them? And these are relatively easy to do. Here's another wedge that I use. This one's particularly high. But what all of these will do is they will help me with the material that I place on my composition to raise it. And these are relatively easy to do. Here's another one. So basically, what you're doing is you're cutting strips of cardboard like this, okay? This is pretty simple stuff. You may want to cut some thin ones, some long ones, short ones. But the idea is to create these beforehand, just like I've done here. All right. Use your glue and put these together so that when you need them, they're ready for you. And that's what I did here. And this is pretty much what I did. I just put these together with a little bit of glue, sandwiched it right on top, and just kind of let it sit there. Here's one. Here's another one. And I do enough of these because I never know exactly how I'm going to use them. The next thing that I do as I prepare my material for my assembly is to select the pieces of cardboard that I think I'm going to use. I got this cardboard, which is nicely printed on one side. It's got a lot of color. And if I don't have water-based paints that I can cover my cardboard with, sometimes this is a great way to create color and add color. And here's a sample of something I had already previously cut out. And here's another one. And I kind of tend to stick with the gestures that Stella likes to use in his work. So you see, kind of like if I were doing a brush stroke, if this was a big brush and it would go like that, all I'm doing is just kind of following those gestures. But if you make enough of these, you're able to pull them into your work as you start assembling, as you start putting things together. And I went kind of a little crazy. I have a whole bunch of this over here on the side. But what I'm doing here, and here's how to think about this. Over here, I took a piece of cardboard and I made these gestures. You see that? So I started carving these up, drawing these out the way I thought I might want them. Something as simple as, I don't know, I think I might want something that's sort of like this, and it does that. And over here, I think I'll do one of these, and it does that. Okay? And over here, I might go with something that's more squiggly. And again, these could be almost mimicking a brush stroke or a big fat marker. And then you come in here, and with your scissor, you start cutting these things out. These gestures, I call them. You see this piece here? This cardboard is certainly much thicker than this one, okay? So it's great for making stable sculptures. But for cutting into it, it's a little tough. So there's a couple ways that I do this, and I have a little video where I show you how to cut cardboard. So I'm going to put that aside. So I think we all kind of get that what you're going to do is cut out these pieces. And I'll give you just a quick sample of one. So I'm going to go like this. I think I want to use that. And all these little extra pieces that come off your main pieces, you can use those for wedges and for things to raise your composition. So what you notice here is kind of interesting, is that this has 2 plies on it. This is actually made up of 3 plies. This is a sheet of paper that has been attached to this comb-like texture in the middle, something that looks like this, you see? And then on top of that, they put another piece of paper. So this is actually like a sandwich of paper. You see that? So if I start pulling this apart, guess what? I'm going to wind up with some really interesting looking textures. But let's say I want to pull it apart, but I don't want to rip it that way. I don't want to have this sort of organic line. Let's say I want something a bit more controlled. So one of the things that I do when I work with paper is I tend to look at whatever I'm working with. So this is a kid's scissor, and one technique that I use is I score this paper. I go like this. See what I'm doing? And when I do that, and again, make sure that you're working on a surface that's okay to do this. If not, I would put another piece of cardboard underneath it just to protect your surface like this, okay? All right? And you do the same thing here. But let me show you. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I was already doing this with another piece. And I'll show you something I was working on. Oh, here it is. I went a little crazy with that and using the same technique, and I created this little guy here. You see that? So now, not only am I getting my Stella-like gestures in here with texture, but I'm also creating something we call negative spaces by cleaning up and removing the inner portion of those spaces. And what's really cool about that, I'm going to show you now, is that when I remember these little wedges we did? They're kind of dry now. What's really cool about that is that now I can use these little wedges to actually create some distance between the background and the foreground. So what I want to do with my composition is attach this to these guys, right? So that I can get some depth. That's what I'm going to do. Okay? That makes sense? See what I'm doing? And the quickest way to do that is to flip this little guy over, grab a few of these guys that I have right here. This one I just made. This one, this little thin one can go in here so it doesn't show all over the place. And this one I was going to use, but I'm going to use this a little different because I put an L brace on it. And if you look at one of the videos that I made, you'll see why we use this particular one. So I'm going to put that on the side. But I like these little guys here. These are just nice enough to give me a little distance between the background and my object. Here's another one. Okay, so all I'm doing now is I am attaching these little braces with plenty of glue. Don't use that much, but use enough. And once this dries, you can paste it down on your composition, on your paper, on your, where is it? Your 8.5 by 11 or 9 by 12 piece of paper. Remember this? That's what we're going to attach this to. Okay? Okay, so I have spent a little time cutting my pieces and getting myself ready for my project. You say, whoa, that's a lot of stuff. But yeah, you want to create enough cutout pieces and enough gestures in your work so that when you start assembling this, it'll come together really nicely. And you have enough choices. Imagine this is your painting palette, and these are all your options. And this is red, and red's sort of like a rectangular piece, and this is blue and yellow, and this has all kinds of wonderful textures and things going on. But hello, maybe when you're putting your composition together, you don't want to do this one. Maybe you want to do that. Look at that. That already pops out from the background. So in a way, you're going to start assembling these pieces together and making a small construction, a small assembly. And in some cases, see, I started already playing around saying, oh, I like that shape and I like this texture, and I attach this to that. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to use it, but I assure you I'm going to come up with something. I went ahead and took my 8.5 by 11 cardboard, or my 9 by 12 cardboard, and I attached the first piece that I did, and you can see that there's depth here. From here to here, there's depth. I also had made a couple of additional attachment brackets as well as braces, and I also attached those too. And now I'm ready to start building my composition. So I did this sort of nice big gesture, and what I want to do is kind of play off that gesture and see how I can take that somewhere else. And because I've already set myself up with braces and bridges and things that I can use to kind of build this up, I'm ready to roll. So you remember I had already cut some pieces. So who knows? Maybe this will work very nicely here. And when we start thinking about these things, you want to think of them in stages. You want to put a few things down and let them dry, and then come back to them. So that kind of works nicely. And let's see, what else can we add to this? And again, you want to design your piece so that you can start working with both. You could start thinking about the lower and the bottom and the top and all of these levels of your work. And again, I tend to lay things down first before I glue them on. I just want to see kind of what they're doing. This looks kind of cool. It sort of breaks up that space a little bit. And then I go back to the pile that I had made, and I start looking at all of my other options. And this is where the fun really starts, because I've got a lot of stuff going on here. But this is where it really gets interesting, because I want a little color in there. Not sure how I want to fit that in, but maybe that'll be cool there. So what you want to do is start kind of thinking about your composition. You want to think about things like what's going on with this square back here. Do I want things to stay within the square? Do I want things to break out of the square? Remember, you can always cut into that square after you lay your pieces down. Um, so that's kind of cool. And I love that Cheerio box, but I like what's going on with this. This is kind of cool. So again, when I think about this, I'm like, how high up do I want this? And because I put a little bridge here, I think this could come up pretty high, and that could really add some beautiful depth and a level of assembly. So there's layers, there's textures, all kinds of things going on. So really what I'm trying to do here, just kind of lay out a kind of a foundation for myself before I glue it all together. Okay? I just want to kind of see where things are hitting, where things are intersecting. I might want to change my mind. And so if I do that, I don't want to glue it just yet. I want to kind of think about it. This looks kind of cool or kind of interesting, but maybe that will work better if I do something like that and sort of let it sort of flow in and out of that. I'll bring this back shortly as soon as I start gluing it together, and we'll see the completed version.